Hello, everybody. Today we're taking a look at Buck Rogers, Battle for the 25th Century. This is a great board game made in 1988 by TSR. TSR is a legendary game company. I'm interested in everything made by them. Buck Rogers is a dudes on a map area control game set in space. The action spans our inner solar system, which even includes the asteroid belt beyond Mars, with a few extra fictitious heavenly bodies thrown in there too for good measure. The game closely resembles Risk, at least in its setup, and the conflict aspect of it is slightly, I would say, one more notch complex than Axis and Allies. The game is TSR to a T, meaning it's ambitious. It goes out of its way to be immersive and different. And like most things by TSR, out of the box, it's an unpolished gem that players can easily tweak and adjust to get the most out of their gaming experience. So if you go online, you'll see that there are a lot of fans of this game, but it also has some vocal detractors and critics. So with this video, I hope to answer the question, is Buck Rogers a classic grail game that you should look to get on the secondary market, or is it something best forgotten, totally obsolete by today's standards? Well, I'll answer that question for you right now. With a few rules, tune-ups, mods, and gameplay adjustments, Buck Rogers is a top tenor in the area control category of all time. I'm convinced. So let me show you why I think so highly of it, and I'll explain how it all works. I'll begin with explaining the object of the game, briefly cover the setup, turn structure, movement, the pieces, units, and combat. All this is not complicated, so that part won't take long. And then I'll just address some of the criticisms of the game and then cover some of the modifications that you can implement to make your copy of Buck Rogers better than it is out of the box. As I describe the main rules of the game, I'll also sneak in a few suggestions here and there that you can try to make your experience with it more streamlined and run more smoothly. So let's look at the board. There's nothing else like it. It has a dynamic playfield with rotating planets. You track the progress of the planet orbits each round. So this means the distances separating everything under dispute changes, and things that may seem near each other on the board may actually be far away in game scale. A quick example of movement would go something like this. A transport on Venus's Elysium territory would move 1, near orbit, 2, far orbit, 3, solar system display, and 4, transit to Mercury far orbit, if Mercury were present in that location. If not, the transport would remain in space on the solar system track. Managing the solar system display is not difficult. You advance the planets at the start of each turn and flip the markers over to show that you've moved each one. Why is this so cool? Well, it means that you can launch and land attacks on other players that they don't even see coming. They may not pick up on your intended flight path, or maybe they can't anticipate their vulnerabilities based on future planetary alignments. So that's really awesome. Players also have options with respect to achieving game winning conditions. These differ based on various player counts. However, there should always be 6 factions in the game. So it's like Conquest of the Empire, which I covered in a previous video. So in a 2-player game, each player would control 3 different colors or characters. The good guys are Buck Rogers, Wilma Deering, and Doc Hauer. The bad guys are named Ardala, Black Barney, and Kane. In a 2-player game, each separate faction gets 4 startup territories, so 12 per side. And a side has to be the first to control 25 territories. So basically, you're trying to double the size of your good or evil alliance. The winning condition is basically true no matter how many players are in the game. Additionally, there is another winning condition. So if you kill off all of your opponent's leader pieces, they lose instantly. So you can win that way too. Moving on to the setup, it's very risk-like. Players draw territory cards randomly to determine where they start on the map, and initial deployment order is also randomly determined by numbered cards. There are rules regarding how many units are allowed to start in individual zones, which I won't get into, but it all works well and makes sense. You get a set number of units to start, and it doesn't seem like enough at all. Like 16 fighting units only, and 2 factories. That's it. So, after all the pieces are on the board, the turn order is established randomly, and this is supposed to be done in typical weird TSR fashion. So you roll a d10, highest number goes first. If it's an odd number, play proceeds clockwise from player one. If it's an even number, the turn order is supposed to be to go the other way around. So we never use this rule. The game already comes with numbered cards to manage randomness. We just reuse those. And I laminated mine so I don't burn through them, and just reshuffle them and place one beside each color to get your turn order. The turn structure itself is probably different than you might expect. Player one moves their pieces, then player 2 through 6 move their units in turn order. And after all that is said and done, you get contested territories all over the board that need to be resolved. Battles are resolved from the center of the solar system moving outward. Only after all battles are resolved does the build phase begin, and this occurs in the previously established turn order. So some people complain online that the turn order sequence creates a lot of chaos on the map. Also, they say the person who goes first is at a massive disadvantage because every other faction in turn can react to their move. Maybe so. It's all part of the game, though. However, if this bothers you, there is a way to adjust the flow of the game so that it more closely resembles Axis and Allies. You could try this. Once you determine the turn sequence, you could have player 1 move and fight, then player 2 move and fight, and then after everyone does this, they build in sequence. So I've played it this way more than once, usually with ANA dudes or rookie players. I find it makes for a more familiar, easy to grasp experience. And I'm not saying it's better this way at all. I'm just saying the style of play doesn't ruin the game if you were to choose to play it like that. Unlike Axis and Allies, players roll d10s on a combat resolution table looking for high numbers that score hits on enemy units. It's okay. It's easy to use and understand. It works well, in my opinion. And if you notice, even control markers have nominal combat values. You don't see that very often in games. I think it's technically a advanced rule in the rules. So land combat follows more rigid, unforgiving guidelines than space combat. For example, land units move just a single territory per turn, and no retreats are allowed. The action in space is way more fluid, and ships can move 4 spaces a turn. They can also retreat or blow right past enemy units in the same zone if they want to avoid combat. And I think those differences are really thematic and welcome. The actual minis you get in Buck Rogers are excellent. They're high quality, as good as any other 1980s Ameritrash tabletop setup. So I'll just give you an express rundown of what you get. Regular troopers, 5 can fit in a transport ship, I think. These are your main foot soldiers. Jennies, genetically enhanced soldiers. I prefer to think of them as androids, though, kind of like in Blade Runner. Because like in Blade Runner, they are, super strong and dangerous. And the one rule in that story applies here. And that is they're not allowed off their home worlds. You're not allowed to transport Jennies. So this is really cool. And it's a difficult trade-off to manage. And you don't see this in any other game of this kind that I'm aware of. Now, some people say they break the game. They just encourage turtling because players can just crank them out and remain in place. And there's no real effective way to counter the spamming of androids or whatever you want to call them across an entire planet. So the response is that's nice. At some point, you'll need to expand off whatever planet it is you're on that you overran with Jenny's. And if you want to win, how are you going to do that? Oh, by the way, if you do this, I guess you'll just have to roll up on your planet at some point with a fleet of battleships and bombard it from near orbit every turn until all your factories are destroyed and your Jennies become, well, like tears in the rain. Anyway, you also have little fighter ships. They're the most versatile piece. They fight on land and in space. Battleships only fight in space, and they are really tough, and they also get planetary bombardment roles. Transports, they move troopers, and they are screened in combat, so they're always the last thing to get hit. L stars or satellites. If you control an entire planet, you can deploy them, and they get a round of free shots at ships that enter orbit, near orbit. Factories, they build small units each round. Big units take 2 turns to build, and you have markers to denote factories that are in the process of building. They also work well in this game, so no complaints here. The leaders are cool sculpts. They fly around like ships, and their presence gives all of your units that are with them a +2 on every 1d10 combat roll. Now for the mods. Speaking of leaders, the game comes with cards that describe their unique special abilities. The internet haters absolutely blast this aspect of the game. They say the special powers are asymmetrical, unbalanced, if not just plain stupid, and at least unusual and wacky. The critics aren't wrong. One character, I think it's Killer Kane, I think it is, captures fighter ships defeated in combat instead of destroying them, and Ardala can steal stuff from people. Fortunately, the game does not suffer at all by simply ignoring all the special abilities. Play without them, and you won't miss them. If you just gotta have them, at least make them single usage powers. Make an X counter that you can just drop on a leader card to indicate they've used up their one-shot special ability. So mod number 2 is a playable solar gravity well. And this is a fun variation of a suggested advanced rule that comes with the game. This also works to address a concern some people have with the general dynamics of the playfield. So, because the Outer Rim asteroid territories are widely dispersed and are far flung in game scale, the natural progression or net flow of units um, during the game tends to be towards the center where there are more territories. So, in other words, there is not a tremendous amount of incentive to head outward unless players have an easier way to get there. So, we add a sun slingshot rule. Any unit may stop on the sun during the course of regular movement to attempt a gravity well slingshot. Roll 1d10 per unit. On a 1 to 7 result, the unit gains 4 additional movement points. On an 8 to 10 result, the unit is destroyed. So a successful move this way, starting from Mercury, could send a unit 1 step beyond Mars on the solar system display in a single turn. My favorite mod, though, is one cherry picked from a variant rules package uploaded to BGG by a user named Pete Smith, I believe. And it's just great. It's known as the Saturn expansion mod. And this mod addresses the issues people may have with factories in this game. So, Buck Rogers is fairly unique in that it has no currency. You don't buy units. You get units from factories, and when you lose them, you're dead basically. There are rules about getting units from black markets if your factories get blown up, but it doesn't matter. You're still screwed without them. That is, unless you play with the Saturn mod. So you place Saturn at the top of the regular play field. Saturn's transit path connects to Ceres' starting location. Saturn doesn't rotate in game scale, it's too far away. To reach Saturn, a player must begin movement from Ceres' starting location. The distance from Ceres' launch point to Saturn's surface is 4 movement points, so a ship's full movement. So treat Saturn as one giant land territory with an indestructible factory complex. Saturn is too big to support a satellite network, so no one can, put L stars up satellites. And holding Saturn is worth 2 territory points. So the cool thing about this mod is that it provides an irresistible incentive to head out of the solar system. And it gives losing factions a last hope if they get chased from a planet nearer to the sun. And you'll see great battles in the outer rim like you haven't seen before as different powers race to reach Saturn since nobody actually starts there. So you can use a couple of player aids too. The one I like and use comes from Pete Smith's variant rules package posted on BGG. And this is a simple track that keeps account of the number of territories held by each alliance. And use this instead of constantly trying to recount what you hold every turn. And this is something that really should have been included in the original game. Also, one gripe I have with this whole thing is that the transport ID counters are almost identical to the land territory control markers. And transport IDs are used to track loaded ships and fleets that are in transit on the solar system track because there's not enough room on it to have a mess of ships spilling all over the display. So I suggest finding old Scrabble tiles or something like that and mod them into fleet marker tiles. So at least you have a chunkier, more substantial visual cue for your fleet locations. Now for some quick gameplay tips. Venus is the only big planet that has no natural or artificial satellites. So it's probably the easiest, biggest planet to try and take over since you don't need a transport to get all the territories. The Earth's moon, don't sleep on it. It's just 4 territories, but it's the only satellite or moon that can support its own defensive satellite network. And also, don't trust anybody stacking on the Mars space elevator because they could get to Earth's far orbit in one move from there, and they can't usually get there that quickly anywhere else. So, now for some general advice. When playing Buck Rogers, try to avoid playing it out all in one session. You have to take your time with this game. It's not something you'd ever want to bring to somebody's house on a whim and hope to bang out a game in like 3 hours. You could, but it would be so much better if you had a game room with a table that wouldn't be disturbed if you left it out so you could play it over multiple sessions. There are tons of little pieces and moving parts too. So it's not unlike a pinball machine in that it's happiest when it stays put as opposed to being carted all over the place. And don't forget the game has a giant's footprint on any game table. Furthermore, the setup takes time and planning. Your decision making is never straightforward. So you have to study the map a lot to figure out what your options might be from turn to turn. And you might find the game mentally taxing too, not in a bad way, but if you rush it, it's usually disastrous. For example, first time players almost always lose their leaders on the first turn or the second turn because there's just so much going on and it's just so hard to get used to. So I say you need to advise players ahead of time to think of their leaders as kings in chess that need protection rather than offensive pieces like queens or rooks, except in rare occasions. So overall, I feel Buck Rogers' Battle for the 25th Century is an unpolished, absolute gem of a game out of the box. With some imagination and implementation of mods, the game is really, really cool. A Grail game? Yeah, by any measure. So if you have the ability to host epic style monster size tabletop games over multiple sessions and you haven't played Buck Rogers, well, I think you don't know what you're missing. I hope someday that you'll be able to give it a try with your best gaming buddies. And thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more content coming soon.